Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro, and we are looking at gRPC. Before we understand what gRPC is, we need to know what RPC is. So that stands for Remote Procedure Call, and this is a framework of communication in distributed systems. It allows one program on a machine to communicate with a program on a remote machine without knowing that it's remote. And the concept of RPC has been around since the 1970s, so gRPC is much newer. It's a modern open source high performance RPC framework that can run in any environment, and gRPC was initially created by Google. So you can kind of think of gRPC as an alternate method of communication instead of REST or GraphQL. And it can connect services in and across data centers with pluggable support for load balancing, tracing, health checking, authentication, and probably more. So let's try to take a look at how this actually works. So the idea is you'll be installing a gRPC library for your program. You'll be defining a protobuf file that describes the data structure, and those files usually have a .proto extension. You'll be writing code that works with gRPC. So distributed systems like Kubernetes uses gRPC for pod communication, and so that's kind of the example. And honestly, I was a bit lazy here with gRPC because I probably could have showed you code examples and stuff like that. But with Kubernetes, you're never really touching gRPC. It's just there. And my experience with gRPC is I used it when I was using something called NATS, N-A-T-S, not to be confused with NAT, Network Address Translation. NATS is an event bus that requires gRPC, these protobuf files. But even though I don't have it here, the idea is that you would have a file. It has its own syntax, but it's a file that defines the structure of communication, and then you implement in your chosen language, like Ruby or Android, how to like you'd load that structure into like using your standard library so you can read it. So it basically you define the payload in a structure, and then you have files that read it. But anyway, if you ever use an event bus, you come across these things, and there's something kind of similar to it. It might be you might be using protobuffer, but it is like an AWS event bus with I'm trying to remember what's called Event Bridge. So that's something that's similar there. But for this, I'm not going to get into those examples and show you because you're never going to touch it. At least I've never seen anyone have to touch it unless you're developing something for a project. But there you go.